Well, all good points on this. I hope that even those people that aren't going to be interim managers out there, they have. I think there's some value in our perspective in the roles that we've performed for them. So.
You are listening to Manager Brothers Lessons Learned. Twice each month, Gregg and Jae draw on their combined 80-plus years of state and local government work experience to help listeners avoid the pitfalls they and others have unwittingly stumbled into. And now, on to the episode.
Well, welcome to Manager Brothers Lessons Learned. This is Jae Gutcho, and on the other end
is Gregg Gutcho.
Hey, what a coincidence!
Well, I could tell you paused there because you forgot my name.
I did. I can never remember if there's 2 G's or 3 G's. I don't know, or 5 G's. I don't know. But
there's a lot. There's a lot of them anyway. I like to say that when people spell it with only 1 G on the end, that's my nickname.
Oh, okay, all right. Well. I don't have as many G's, but I have more J's, so a couple of J's.
There you go.
So
there you go.
Which reminds me of there's a campground near where I'm working. It says it's Double J Campground, but it has Double JJ Campground. So I'm thinking, every time I drive by it, it's like, do they mean double J's or do they mean quadruple J's now?
If it's quadruple, that's a lot of J's.
It is a lot of J's. So I'm just going to, I'll just stay with myself with the double J's here. So,
okay.
At any rate. So as you can tell, we're being a little bit more whimsical today. And what we would like to do is this is our, just to give you a little heads up, kind of a second to the last session, and then we're going to take a break. But this one, we're going to talk about our experiences as interim municipal managers.
Do you have any experience actually doing that, Jay?
Being an interim?
Yes.
No, I'm just speaking off the top of my head what it would be like, but no.
This is imaginary. This is a complete fantasy.
Well, I was thinking about this as we were, kind of first mentioning this topic, at any rate, and I thought, well, my first 2 assignments were almost like a stretched out interim because my first one was 18 months, the second one was 13 months, through no fault of my own, I should say. At any rate, and we've talked a little bit about that, and if people have specific questions, we can delve into that at a later date. But it's still. I think some of the processes and mechanisms, or whatever the right terminology is very similar in a short assignment like that. Similar to what it would be as an interim manager. So
I agree. I agree entirely. I like to say that all city manager jobs are interim jobs. There's no, you really don't have any idea how long those things are going to last. It's not, I don't have a good way of referring to them when they're not interim. They're not permanent. That's for sure. I can tell you that from personal experience. And just to kind of, because there may be people that don't know that you have just started your first official interim job here. You've now done it for 4 weeks. Is that right?
Yes, this is my 4th week, yes.
Okay, all right.
Technically, it's my second interim, but I don't know if my first one actually counts because it was the interim for the one I had just left. When
that's true.
Things didn't work out very well with my my initial replacement. I guess I was more difficult to replace than even I had imagined. But,
and that's hard. It's hard for me to imagine that, but that's just the way it goes. And I should indicate that I am, depending on how you you count them, I'm on either my fifth or sixth interim job. I have returned to an interim position that I had held a year ago. The position was filled, and that didn't work out. It was very similar circumstance, and so after a little bit, they invited me to come back while they go through the search process again. But so I have a little bit more experience. Well, I added it up here sometime last year, and since I left full-time management, I had spent half of the remaining months in an interim role. So that's a lot of interim experience there. Nevertheless, I think that the point that you made, or returning to the point that you made earlier, I think that there are a lot of similarities to between what any manager faces in going into a new community and what interim managers face. But as you pointed out, it is all condensed. You have to do that fairly quickly. So I'm kind of curious I have my own thoughts about how I do this job, but maybe talk a little bit about, Jay, what has been occupying your time for the most part as you have gotten started in this role?
Well, I initially thought I was going to just try to get on board with a lot of capital improvement projects that have been going on. There was my predecessor did an excellent job at getting grants and things in order. It's just that from the outside, I wouldn't have anticipated that you would get every grant possible all at one time, which is what it seems like, and then trying to administer those and get familiar with all of that. So that's been a challenge, working basically 3 days a week for 4 weeks already. It doesn't seem like that's enough time, to get a good handle on it. And it's not like you can just shut the door to anything new that's coming in and just say, well, we're not going to deal with that. So I have a site plan review and a special use permit going on. I've had a couple of other zoning applications that had to be that weren't cut and dry necessarily, so they take a little bit more time, and then just trying to make contacts with the various contractors and other movers and shakers, I would say, in the community, just to get on top of all of the projects, and so that's been ongoing. And I've outside of the office, I've had to take a few phone calls and things, which is fine. I mean, they've been brief, but that's just something that kind of goes with the territory, because other people don't necessarily appreciate that you're only in the office 3 days a week. And you just can't arbitrarily say, well, I'm never going to answer the phone, and what have you. So there's a little bit of that. So that's kind of the juggling act, is the way I would term this.
Yeah, I'm curious, and in some instances, interim managers are going to be in the office 5 days a week, as is typically the case for a permanent manager. I have not done that myself. What is your feeling about, is it manageable for you to be in the office that limited number of days, or would it be, would the village be better off if you were there 5 days a week?
Well, I would say, at least on the onset, that perhaps more time in the office would have been of benefit to both the village and me. That's kind of now speaking 4 weeks into this, of course. So it may still be worthwhile to see about stepping up the amount of hours. I could work more from home, although that's more challenging because all of the documents and everything that I need are at the office, and I don't really want to cart a whole carload of stuff back and forth with me necessarily. So,
right.
When the fallacy, I guess, with many interim jobs is that you're just there to maintain, and that's what I probably said that when I first talked with them. We're going to basically, the plan is just to try to maintain. Well, maintain is at this fairly high level of activity.
Sure.
Right now. So there's things that you just can't you can't put on the back burner. You do have to address those. So
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a guess a little bit as to what kind of time is going to be required when you go into an interim job. Now, one of the advantages, that we have is we do have experience that we're drawing on. So there is efficiency that we have that we can apply to a position like an interim role where, because we know how to do this job as we're coming in, it's easy for us to, kind of get the lay of the land, figure out what needs to be done, prioritize and focus on the most important things. And clearly, I think there are different expectations for what an interim is going to do, and you find out stuff when you get there that they didn't necessarily tell you were going to have to deal with, and you don't know what the next problem is that's going to cross your desk, and so I think all of those things make it a little bit of a guess. My perspective is I don't want to. I don't like to run up the tab for my services, the charges that I'm billing a client for, if they don't really need me around the office. And I make it pretty clear that when I go into an interim role, there are certain things that I am not going to be doing. I remember one of the places I interviewed for, and was appointed as interim manager, they said, well, how are you going to get to know the community while you're here? And I said, I'm not going to do that. That's not what I think that you really want to pay me for. It's important for the manager that's going to be there on a full-time basis to build relationships with the broader community. And it's not that I don't spend any effort at all involved with others, but that's not the best use of my time. My time is really better devoted to making sure projects are accomplished that have been underway, making sure we're planning for the things that are going to come up sometime in the future, and dealing with whatever the issues are that that come in the door that need to be attended to. Also, in one community, this was when I was leaving, there was this expectation that was different than mine. I had a couple of people said, we had no idea that you were going to be taking these issues on and resolving them during the time that you were here. I was very surprised by that, because those were all things that I was told. These are things you need to be paying attention to. These are the things that are kind of in process that you'll be working on. I don't know what the council members expected, but apparently they didn't expect, some of them at least didn't expect that I was going to get those things done, even though they were on the to-do list that was provided to me. So I'm not sure, but what there are some council members who have, first of all, I think it's important to point out that, we know you and I know what goes on in a manager's office, but council members don't know what the day-to-day operations of a manager's office really look like for the most part. They're not there enough to see what takes place on an everyday basis. And I think that in some instances, they're wanting, when they hire an interim, it's just somebody to kind of keep an eye on things, make sure that, nothing runs off the rails. Somebody's paying attention to make sure other people are doing their jobs and those kinds of things. Well, yes, you do those things, but that's a small part of the job. There are other tasks that have to be accomplished that, somebody has to do. There's somebody that has to sign the paperwork and, has to look over stuff that's being done and so forth. Put agendas together for council meetings and, and then deal with whatever the issues are that are going to come along.
Yeah, and I think you still, whether you know it or not, you're getting acquainted with the community, and we have to do a little bit of that since we're also engaged in working with the council on the next manager search. So that's necessary to be able to put together the profile and update the position description, or those kinds of things. But
right.
The other thing is that council members. You're at the same time you're getting to know the council members, so maybe by virtue of that you're getting to know the community a little bit as well. But the council, I think that that they really do expect that you're going to hit the ground running, when you first sit down in the chair in the office there. However, my experience from my previous more permanent positions is that any community you come into, you can, even if you have experience, you really can't hit the ground running until you do get to know the community a little bit. It's a little. What off-putting, I guess, is maybe the terminology. I'm thinking where you're coming into a community. When you're thinking about, I think back on the permanent positions, you have time to kind of adjust and adapt, to the community and figure things out. Even learning the street names, for instance, or what have you.
Right.
So I have people ask me questions about specific streets, and I have to look at a map yet because I don't have them all memorized. I know how to find my way home at night, but that's I don't have all the streets memorized. So
I can appreciate that problem because the community where I'm working now, and I don't know why they did this, but they have streets like. They have a 4th Street and a 4th Avenue.
Oh,
they have a 2nd Street and a 2nd Avenue. These were not creative people, I think, when they went about naming streets in this town. But, it's hard for me to, keep those straight, let alone, and some of them I still haven't figured out. Some of them run one direction and some the other way. And so I think the locals all know it. But I have to believe that there are times when emergency services go to the wrong address. In terms of trying to find somebody that's calling for an ambulance or whatever it might be. But in any case, it is those kinds of things that you're not going to be there long enough to really develop the kind of familiarity with that would make you as effective as, say, the person that's going to be there and be in that seat for a couple of years and whatever. So I think that those are all valid points in terms of the differences between being a permanent manager and being one that is only going to be there for a short period of time. The other thing that I notice is, as you have more experiences as an interim in different communities, you'll probably run into the same thing, and that is, I don't always remember what applies to one community versus another. I had an instance where an issue came up, and I can't remember if it was at the DDA, Downtown Development Authority meeting, or where it was, but I said, and I'm not sure, but I think there might be a charter prohibition against doing whatever it was that they were talking about doing. Well, it turns out there is a charter provision, but not in that community. That was in the last community I was interim manager in, and I just got confused about it, and I remember reading it someplace, and that's a hazard. I've run into that throughout my entire career because, you work in a few communities and eventually the charter's language blurs together and you say, I think we've got a provision like this, which is why I always make sure to go back and check because I just don't trust that it was community A versus community B or community C.
Yeah, I mean, even within communities too, where people think that they remember, a specific provision or ordinance or something like that, but when you sometimes when you go back and reread those, they've interpreted it wrong, for a period of time. They just, it's not intentional that somebody's chosen to ignore it or whatever, but things do get lost in the shuffle, and that happens whether it's a change in managers or whether it's a change in elected officials. There's some of those things that are going to get lost in the shuffle a little bit. So.
Oh, I agree. I have run into that myself, and I think that that's one of the advantages, quite frankly, of having experienced managers come in on an interim basis is that they have the experience, they know what they should see, and they know where to look for things, and as a consequence, they're going to identify things like that and say, this is not the way that it should be done. Here's what your own ordinance provides, or here's what your own charter says, and because you're new and you've looked at it because you had to, you didn't have that that memory that you were relying on from having been there, and you just just encounter those kinds of things, and so it's that fresh perspective, I think, that offers an opportunity to rethink some of the things that are being done. That having, the other side of that, though, is that I am always reluctant to make, in an interim role, always reluctant to make too many substantive changes that are reflective more of my style than of anything that is a legal requirement or, what would be considered to be best practices, mainly because I'm not going to be there very long. And, I don't want a situation where I'm making changes in the organization and then, the permanent manager comes in and undoes what I've done. I don't think it's good for the organization to subject it to a ton of changes.
We'll return to Manager Brothers Lessons Learned in a moment. Do you have a topic you would like Gregg and Jae to explore? Are you interested in being a guest on Lessons Learned? Do you have comments about this episode? You can write Gregg and Jae using the contact form at greggllc.com/lessons. That's greggllc.com/lessons.
Yeah, and one of the things that as you're talking, it occurs to me is and you've walked into this more than I have, of course, where you have vacancies in your staff, whether it's could be department heads or it could just it could be line staff or whatever, and I've always thought that it might be best for the permanent manager to be involved in doing the recruiting and recruitment and interviewing and hiring of these people, because as an interim manager, I'm not going to be there that many weeks or months, but when I'm looking at current situation, I think we have one vacancy in a small DPW, and it's like, okay, now you've just added 30% to the remaining staff's jobs,
right,
to try to get stuff done. So obviously, unless you're going to pay a lot of overtime, they're not going to be able to get everything done or as done as well as they might ordinarily like to, with being short a person. So in a small communities, I think it's even more pressing if you have vacancies that you need to try to push forward and get somebody on board. And so we have DPW, we have a police officer vacancy right now, and we have a part-time administrative assistant who's there now but has wanted to fully retire, you might say, and looking at, okay, this now changes the dynamics as far as internal controls when you don't have that person there to do some of those functions. So that's going to be a kind of ongoing challenge here that some of these things I don't think are going to be able to wait until the permanent administrator is there.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. Except from my perspective, I don't think that in any of my permanent or in my interim slots that I have replaced any department heads. And there may be times when that is absolutely essential, depending on how long the interim role is expected to last. But I prefer, if I can, to leave those department head level positions vacant so that whoever is hired in a permanent role has the ability to fill that position. And I will, say in one community that I did do that. There were a couple of administrators that were then in acting capacities. They really wanted me to be the one that put them in the permanent role, and I didn't do that. My successor did put them into those roles, so it did work out. But I know that there was a little bit of resentment that I was not willing to take that on and do that. But I felt that it was important to, leave that position vacant. In another community, there was an administrative assistant position And it was really one that was dedicated only part-time to the manager's office. The occupant of that position retired a short time after I started as an interim in that community. And I had by that time determined that there was a need for some additional full-time assistance for the manager, that the manager's office was too busy and really there needed to be an opportunity for the manager to think how should I organize my office in order to get the work done that needs to be done here? I felt there was way too much that was crossing the manager's desk. So we limped along without filling that position for another couple of months, and I had a conversation with the incoming manager and let her know that was why that was vacant, and so she did. She took her time, evaluated what needed to be done, and then filled it in a different way. It was no longer an administrative assistant position in the way that it had formerly been structured. So, I felt that I had provided the incoming manager with a good opportunity to make her own decisions about the way she wanted to structure things there.
Well, one thought too, if you don't mind, just spending a minute more. I want to circle back to the issue of personnel again. Have you been in situations where you've come into what you would expect would have been a fully staffed community and office, and then discover that they're woefully short, perhaps in some areas? I mean, if you're in an interim and you're trying to groom the work environment for making the next manager successful, mm-hmm. if you see that there's a need for additional personnel, is it have you had to approach council and just say, look, we need to add a person here or something like that to make things work a little more smoothly, but also to make it a little bit more attractive for a manager, incoming manager. So.
Yeah, and I've had a situation where not only did the manager leave, but the finance director had left a little while before him. The building official / DPW director left at the same time that he was leaving. The city engineer left, a month later. There were a lot of vacancies in that organization. Now, in some cases we, were able to make adjustments, and in others it just was impractical to do so. And so I took on a lot of duties that involved more day-to-day kind of supervision, or in some cases just making sure I was available to whoever was next in line in that department to make sure that I could handle it. There just wouldn't have been enough time, quite frankly, to try and go through the process of filling all of those vacancies. And that's, right. It would have been a challenge for anybody coming in. The manager who came in has done a good job of, kind of holding all that together, and in the time since he's taken over. But he's made his own evaluation as to what needed to be done in the organization, and we pulled it off. But it was that was one place where I said, man, what have I gotten myself into here?
Yeah, but at least those positions were staffed already, or not staffed, but allocated already.
They existed, right?
So I'm thinking in terms of a position that hasn't even been allocated yet. If you come in as an interim and say, gosh, you really need to have another person here, and this is why,
right.
based on workload and internal controls, whatever it might be, to make things function.
Well, and that goes back to the example that I offered, where the half-time administrative assistant position was vacated through retirement. That was one where it really needed to be up to the incoming manager to say, here's how I need to organize my team in order mm-hmm. to make this work here. So
yeah. Well. That
all
was
right.
the
Well,
thought, so
yeah. Well, all good points on this. I hope that even those people that aren't going to be interim managers out there, I think there's some value in our perspective in the roles that we've performed for them. So,
well, and I think it's worth saying that there's value for those municipalities and for the elected officials to
right.
consider having an interim. The benefits of that. Because I think it'd be far worse for the incoming permanent manager to step into something that's been vacant for mm-hmm. months in some cases.
Right.
So,
well, and the other thing too to think about is that some communities when there is a vacancy in the manager's position, they're automatically thinking about who else in the organization can step in and wear two hats. So it might be a police chief or a DPW director or, city clerk or somebody like that that's already on staff there. Right. I think that this goes back to perhaps a lack of appreciation for how much work a manager actually does in an organization, and the idea that you can have somebody that's already working full-time in whatever their department head capacity is, and then step in and take on these additional duties as well. It's a cost savings for the organization, perhaps, but it's not one that necessarily makes as much sense as you might think it would make, mainly because you're going to have work suffer on both ends. Both the manager work and the department head work may suffer in a situation like that. And there are reasons why organizations do that. One of the positions that I took, there was a logical individual in the organization in the role of finance director, and he was approached about his willingness to step into the interim role while he also was finance director. He said, I just don't have time. I don't have enough personal capacity to do all the things we need to do in the finance area and also take on this, this additional role. And I, having been there, I think it was prudent. He had a lot of responsibilities already. And then to think about taking on additional ones, I think the organization would certainly have suffered in the meantime. And that doesn't make it a good situation for the incoming manager then in a situation like that where there's been a lot of things that just hadn't been able to be attended to. One of the things I like to do, and this may be the last point that I'll make, but one of the things that I always ask council members to do is if there's a nuisance issue out there, something that's maybe kind of hung on for a while that, the previous manager hadn't been able to address, I said, do not hesitate to have those to bring those to me. I would rather take them and deal with those nuisance issues so that the next manager doesn't inherit them, so that he or she has the luxury of not having, some things that have been, out there simmering away, and now they've come to a boil, and now they need to be addressed. I'd rather take them off the burner and get them taken care of so that next manager doesn't have to do that.
Yes. Okay.
Well, Jay, we've come to the end of another episode here, but not before we get to a recognition of our sponsor for this episode. And once again, it is Wiseacre Solutions. They have been sponsored for a number of our episodes. Now, here's the issue that they're dealing with this time. Have you ever had problems finding items in the grocery store that you don't buy very often? If you go on shopping only to discover that things have been moved to a different aisle, well, here's what Wiseacre Solutions have come up with. This is a new smartphone app called Aisle View, similar to Google Street View, but it's for grocery stores. So they deploy staff with cameras to scan the contents of major grocery chains in every town in the United States, and then they use artificial intelligence to examine those and log the exact location where you can find that particular item. So you can search then on the app using product type or brand name. So the next time you're looking for hemp milk or pickled herring, turn to Aisle View. This app is free to use, but will feature promotions from the stores you visit most frequently. So just remember Wiseacre Solutions for solutions to problems you didn't know you had. And then looking ahead to our next and final episodes for our first season, we thought that we would focus on, we spend so much time talking about problems. We thought we'd spend an episode talking about some of the cool things we've gotten to do just because we've been managers in communities. And some of these things are not directly work related. Some of them will be, but we thought we would celebrate a little bit some of the fun that we get to have, some of the interesting things that we get to do, some of the interesting people we get to meet as a result of having been given the privilege of working in these kind of jobs. So tune in another couple of weeks, and we will have that episode as well.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
All right, me too.
Thank you for listening today. We hope you enjoyed the show. Manager Brothers Lessons Learned is a production of Gregg Guidance LLC, a multi-specialty consulting firm offering interim management, group process facilitation, workflow analysis, operational studies, and more to local governments in Michigan and beyond.